Thanks to Bangladesh Brand Forum for arranging Bangladesh Innovation Summit. I'm going to take a keynote session on the innovation and how innovation turns out not to be an event, but also a process. My name is Dr. Rubaiyat Sadat. I'm the founder and managing director of Mulytic Labs from Germany, and also founder and managing director of Rubik Advisors in Bangladesh. Welcome to my presentation. Today, what I'm going to tell you, just starting a little bit about myself. So having more than a decade of experience in technology and innovation, I experienced firsthand how companies have succeeded as well as also failed due to how they deal with the innovation. Based on my experience and how I see developing countries like us, like Bangladesh, how we can leverage technology, how we can leverage the expatriates. And I would like to present a framework about this inclusive innovation as a culture for Bangladesh to be the next innovation hub in the world. So let me begin with one topic that many people sometimes have dealt with. So there's a difference between invention and innovation. So I'll just give an example. The greatest example is actually Thomas Alva Edison and McDonald's. In general, technological innovation involves the solution of problems. There are many ways to classify and categorize innovation. I'm not going into detail into that right now, but starting with that example of Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is an outstanding example of the difference between invention and innovation. So he was arguably one of the greatest inventors of all time, but he was among the worst innovators. He was so incompetent at innovating, which means successfully commercializing his developments. So that's why his financial backers, they were forced to remove him from every business venture that he started. In contrast, a McDonald's hamburger is an innovation. Ray Kroc, the company founder, he certainly did not invent the hamburger, French fries, or even the drive-in through pickup window. Kroc's innovations were in standardizing his products, he was really customer focused. He was giving customers a meal made with consistent quality in really hygienic conditions. They delivered just in time. And of course, they started to deliver at very low prices. And those are exactly the key points for innovations. How to successfully commercialize the developments. That's why in the whole world, we see a lot of inventions, a lot of patents, but not all the inventions actually being successfully commercialized and thus turned out to be innovation. So that's basically the difference between an invention and innovation. Now I'm going to present you from the innovators' perspective, how they look like, we can present them as a part of innovation matrix. There are, on a broader sense, there are 4 types of innovators. Example, Google or Tencent. They're termed as hunter. Usually they're characterized by high investing into innovation with focus on external sources. So often they place heavy emphasis on cooperation with startups. They do a lot of acquisitions, and they do a lot of corporate venturing through VC firms or by their own. But they do really high amount of investment into innovation, but they always focus on the business first. So they are called hunter. On the right-hand top right of the quadrant, you see the builders. This type of innovator, they choose high investments, of course. They also do high investment into innovation, but they innovate mainly internally. Great example is Apple or General Electric. They tend to invest significant resources into transforming their organization and build highly innovative departments or even internal spin-offs. So they are the builders. So they also do high investment into innovation, but they focus more on people first, so more on internally. The explorer at the bottom, they're actually a low investment variant of the hunter. So like the hunter, they also look outside the organization for new opportunities, but they're still at the level of experimentation, and really, they don't really orient their entire organization onto innovation. So an explorer, for example, in case of like Thomson Reuters, they're a big corporation. They move into innovation by, for example, by having hackathons or first contacts with startups or partners, but they really don't orient their entire organization into innovation. So that's why they sort of have a lower investment into innovation. And the last type is the experimenter, so which is actually located at the bottom right corner of the matrix. Experimenters commit to a lower investment, but they focus on internal innovation. They focus their attention on internal actions. Greatest example of such organization or such innovators are Netflix, Spotify. They focus their attention on internal action, like innovation training session or design sprints, for example. They generally start their innovation journey, but they also see enough resources inside their organization, and over time they build this capacity internally. So that's exactly kind of like an innovation matrix from the organization perspective, how they put kind of like a culturally, internally or externally into innovation, and their type of investment into innovation. If we look into the product, there are also 4 types of product innovation. I think we somehow know about them, but I would like to emphasize on the examples here. So on the bottom right corner, you see Gillette or Coca-Cola. They do sustaining innovations, which is called incremental. So they really don't really innovate a product. So the product is there, but they do sort of like an incremental approach, for example, like packaging in a new way, or marketing, or having a different approach to their story and to their journey of the product. But there's no such kind of like a big bang or radical innovation. When you see to the top left corner, examples are automobile or PC, for example, or smartphone. So those are like really big radical innovations. So when smartphones appears, or when phones appear with kind of like with text messaging or having the computational power. So at that time, it defined a new market and with new technology. That's exactly how this product innovation or type of product innovation aligns with market and technology. So for Gillette or Coca-Cola, there is no market developments. The market is existing and the technology development is also existing. So they just use the existing market and existing technology with an incremental approach. But when the market is kind of like a new market segment is created using existing technology, a great example is Sony Walkman. So at the time when Sony Walkman moved into the market, at the time the technology was existing, so it was nothing new technology. But the market segment that they created was completely new. So that is what it is called the new segment. So they create, that's called a new segment in the market. You having a market innovation. The top left corner, you see examples where the market, there's an existing market, but adopting new technologies can provide a technological substitution. And that's the last quadrant, which is called substitution in terms of product. Examples, cordless telephone, so or the power tools. So for cordless telephone, so at that time, the telephone was there. So the telephone market was there, but they adopted a new technology and made the telephone cordless, substituting the technology with the cordless technology. Same goes with power tools. So there's an existing market, but they adopt new technologies to innovate a new product. So that's exactly 4 types of products based on how the market is aligned and how technologies, whether it's new or existing technologies, and how they could align with really the product innovation. So we don't see that many big bangs, but in the last 10 years, the wave of new market segments and having the technological advance, new technologies and adopting the new technologies, actually just the innovation landscape has boomed so much in the whole world that that's kind of like amazing. And that's how it looks like right now, and the landscape looks like for the future. I term them as, I reduce them as 5 innovation platforms, and they're focused on more from the investment perspective, how the equity market returns look like. In 2020, the non-innovative equity capitalization was around $94 trillion. Within 2030, the capital growth rate would be only 3% for this non-innovative equity, which would be something around, the forecast is something on $126 trillion. But look at those 5 innovation platforms. Say AI, artificial intelligence, for example. The equity market for artificial intelligence in 2020 was around $10.5 trillion. And the forecast for 2030 with a growth return of 26%, which translates into $108 trillion for artificial intelligence. Same goes with battery technology with over 35% of growth return. Same goes with blockchain and robotics and genomic sequencing. So they have more than 51% or 40% of the growth return in the next 9-10 years. This is going to be this is huge already, and that's how it looks like. For example, these disruptive technologies, which this disruptive innovation, what we know like AI, battery technology, or mobile connected devices. So, for example, in 2020, the total market cap for these innovation technologies like AI, cloud computing, Internet of Things, battery technology was something around $14 trillion, and the estimate of 2030 would be $210 trillion. This is absolutely massive. So, for example, if I take only AI, so this AI innovation would increase nearly tenfold to more than 100 trillion in this equity market capitalization by 2030. So all these technologies are really converging. So, for example, if we take battery technology, so battery technology is also converging with AI. It's also converging with cloud computing. So all these technologies are converging, meaning there are new innovations that is reducing the price, and the adaptation becomes really easier. And that's how, at least in those domains, in these 5 domains, the innovation is now at the prime time, and the whole world is adapting, especially in the developed countries. They're adapting to them pretty fast. That gives to the next question: where exactly are we now? Where exactly Bangladesh is at the moment? Before going into telling about Bangladesh, I'd like to present a very simple analytics on the developing countries in the whole world. Although the developing countries of the whole world, they comprise 47% of the world GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, and they have 85% of the world population. But in terms of total in the world R&D, research and development, these developing countries have less than 20% of their presence in this world R&D, and there are certain reasons. So that's exactly the difference between a developed countries and the developing countries. Because in a developed countries, well, they could do high investment, they could look at external sources, and they could spin off even internally because of high investment. But for developing countries, there are certain challenges. There are many challenges actually for a developing country like us, like Bangladesh. So, for example, public services, they're really predominantly centralized. They're straitjacketed by archaic rules, and the processes are really complex. The processes are really fragmented due to low investment into innovation. So there are almost zero incentives, and as a culture in these developing countries, taking a risk necessary for change is actually not part of the culture of any developing countries, because usually they don't they don't look failure as a part of it, which is really vital for innovation. So to be innovative, you need to be, or you need to accept failures. Otherwise, innovation is not possible. But culturally, for any developing countries, taking a risk is for any change is not part of the culture yet. And the other challenges are, like, for example, there are not many partnerships between the government and the private sectors, as well as also between government and citizens to solve problems, because in developing countries there are a lot of problems. And but there's also, from the financial perspective, there's low investment into innovation. That's why what is really needed is what is called the inclusive innovation, and having this innovation as part of the culture for the country. We need this paradigm shift for this inclusive innovation culture. What is really meant by inclusive innovation? Before really going into this theoretical discussion, I like to give examples. I'm going to present you an example right here in Bangladesh, how inclusive innovation has driven growth. This was one of the incentives, innovative incentives that were taken by the A2I under Prime Minister's Office Bangladesh. This is basically all the data was presented by the policy advisor of Prime Minister's Office Bangladesh in 2018. So based on the data, you can see how a primary pension system, they adopted Bangladesh government's commitment to inclusive innovation, and that's how this changed the whole stuff. And for that, they really didn't need to have kind of like really high-end technology or something as a big bang. It's not like that. It was pretty simple step that was taken as part of this inclusive innovation. And it was just to digitize the primary pension system. Three main issues to tackle: time, cost, and visit. How to reduce time, how to reduce the cost, and how to reduce the visit. And by adopting, so the problem was known. We know that, like, I think everybody in Bangladesh, we know the hassle that we have to go through for a pension system, for the elderly people, for the retirees, and the incentive that the Bangladesh government had taken for this inclusive innovation. So thinking about the known problem and just doing a very pretty simple stuff by adopting technology, by digitizing it. You can see how the cost per retiree has been reduced from $57 to only $17, thus making a savings of 14 million US dollars. So, for example, the existing primary pension system might require 22 steps to go through before a pension being approved. Once it has been digitized, the 22 steps has been reduced to 9 steps or 8 steps. And that's how an innovation should look like. For us, an innovation should be, we know the problem, We just need a new solution by adopting sustainable development goals, by adopting a leadership and knowledge management, for example, making this part of this culture, making them inclusive into this whole innovation ecosystem, as well as also to catch up into emerging markets. So what others are doing, and just simply adopting and customizing that solution for our own problem. That is one of the major beauty for this inclusive innovation is when we say inclusive innovation, we need to tackle the macro development and trends into the consideration. We know the problems. We just need new solution, and that's how the innovation should thrive for Bangladesh. Another very important point for inclusive innovation is this social innovation. So by adopting social innovation and making them part of the innovation ecosystem would actually really help to solve our own problem with a new solution. And last but not the least, as Bangladesh, we are heavily agricultural based countries, and still the economy is heavily based on rural livelihoods. So by having agriculture and rural livelihood included into this whole innovation ecosystem would actually help us to go to the next level of innovation. So for that, we don't need a very high-end technology. We don't need something big bang. We just need to solve problem as we did with this primary pension system, just simply digitizing it. And that has reduced the cost, that has reduced the time, that has reduced the visit, and that has increased the know-how and the well-being of the elderly people for this pension system. The benefits that they're getting is immense. So that's how we could include them into part of this the whole innovation ecosystem, and that's how inclusive innovation works. Still, there are a lot of issues. We still do have a lot of problems in terms of innovation, and it's really common for any developing countries like us. There's still less innovation. Why? Because most of the businesses, they are really behind the global technological frontier. They usually try to either buy or copy the existing foreign technology. So that's usually makes more sense for them. So usually businesses, especially for a macroeconomic environment like us in a developing country, it's usually more unstable, and they're really not conducive to undertake a really lengthy research and development processes. So that's why there's less innovation. So most businesses tend to think, okay, yeah, it might take really long time. It might take a long, maybe this investment and the return of investment is not visible in a short-term basis, because R&D is a lengthy process. So that's why there's less innovation in a country like us. And also the domestic market, they're generally are really less competitive and more segmented. And that's why most businesses, they don't have workforce or financial to undertake the formal R&D. And that's how the cost of capital is pretty higher in the developed so compared to the developed economies, the cost of capital is higher in a developing country, in a developing industry. And that's where the inclusive innovation will answer how we can address these issues with less innovation. So developing countries like us, so we need a research and R&D base. We need to think of innovation as part of the culture. Again, I'd like to emphasize on it. We really don't need very high-end technology. We just really need to identify the problem and find the new solution by adopting existing technology. One very big point that could tackle that could drive innovation, that could drive the inclusive innovation, is a collaboration between university, government, and other businesses, and also external researchers. So more collaboration is needed internally within the country. This would actually drive for this, creating this research and development base, creating this innovation hub, and making Bangladesh an innovation hub. And one very important point to make Bangladesh an innovation hub is to become a part of the global R&D research community, to keep up to date. So where the technology is going, where there is an existing technology, how we can adopt pretty quickly for our known problems. And part of this inclusive innovation would be not only government support for the business R&D, but also the multinational companies, the MNCs. They should also increasingly undertake the R&D portion of it, creating training, training internal employees, creating the culture of innovation within the company, thus creating this innovation culture and making making this part of the company culture and contributing it for this, making this innovation hub as a whole. And another point that I really want to focus on here, part of this inclusive innovation, is to include expatriates into building this R&D base, into building this innovation hub. Because I have heard, or we all know, a term that we know of, a sad term. It's called brain drain. What I see by creating this innovation hub, by making expatriates included into this innovation ecosystem, is to convert this brain drain into brain circulation. I'm just presenting a framework for innovation in Bangladesh. As I mentioned, we don't need radical innovation. We just need to start with incremental innovation. Just by helping to support technology transfer, we just need to transfer the technology. We know our problems, we know the market, and adopting the technology, we do incremental innovation and solve our own problems. Second point is how to help small businesses, support them by government, by the MNCs, for example, by others, and thus make them part of this innovation hub, part of this innovation ecosystem. This inclusion would really drive, because small businesses, they could then drive their innovation and may come with new solution for a new problem. Another very important point that I'd like to mention as part of the innovation framework for Bangladesh is diversity and inclusion. Having women empowerment, having more and more women as entrepreneurs, educate them from the very beginning, include them as part of the whole innovation ecosystem. That would raise productivity. That would certainly raise national entrepreneurial capacity for Bangladesh. The fourth point about the framework that I'm going to mention is how to retain the graduates, the brain drain, how we can stop the brain drain by increasing economic and social incentives for the new graduates, how they would continue their post-study and contribute them into this innovation culture, into this innovation hub, into this whole innovation ecosystem. So include them more so that they in giving them incentive so that they feel, not only feel, but they start contributing as part of the whole innovation ecosystem. And the fifth part, which is very important, and that's exactly where the expatriates I see as expatriates would really help in, will tap in a framework for innovation in Bangladesh, is Bangladesh needs to catch up with the emerging markets by enforcing international standards into the innovation. So when something is kind of like, so as part of this ecosystem, for example, when a new product is developed, or we just simply develop a new process or innovative process or innovative products, whatever it is, to catch up with the emerging markets in the whole world, we have to enforce the international standards from the very beginning. We have to educate the entrepreneurs about international trade. We have to ensure that whatever the entrepreneurs come up with, whatever their product is, they have international standards so that with these products, we could really go to the emerging markets and we could catch up not only within our country, but also making our presence to the outside world, to the whole world, as Bangladesh being an innovation hub. Being said that, that's what I look at. One very big part for this inclusive innovation would be to really prevent the brain drain and convert it to brain circulation. For this, expatriates, they don't necessarily need to be investors or make financial contributions to make impact for our home country. Expatriates can serve as bridges by providing access to the markets, providing access to the outside world, providing access to the global R&D ecosystem. They could also act as a bridge for sources of investment from outside, from developed countries. And last but not the least, they have the expertise. For example, as I mentioned in the last slide, how to enforce the international standard from the very beginning of innovation. So expatriates, they have the expertise. They could act as a bridge. They could really help us to ensure the international standard and make us updated about the international standards, what is going on, and ensure the brain drain and convert it to brain circulation. That's how an inclusive innovation, that's how an innovation culture could really bring all together, not only internally by having the internal collaboration between university, between government and the businesses, but also including the expatriates into the whole ecosystem and leverage their expertise, leverage their access to the emerging markets, leverage their networks as source of investment, and making them the using their expertise for this technology transfer to solve our own problem. And that's how we could make this inclusive innovation as part of the culture and make Bangladesh as an innovation hub. Thanks everyone for listening to my presentation. I would like to thank Bangladesh Brand Forum for creating such an opportunity for everyone, for such a platform through this Bangladesh Innovation Fest, for an innovative Bangladesh. And we all should work together for a common goal to make Bangladesh the next innovation hub in the whole world. Thank you all.